Hi, everyone, and welcome to Unfiltered Flow ELSC, the podcast dedicated to the progression of the fluid power and automation industries. I'm Meghann Cook, that's Alan Burdette, and today we are super excited to have Mr. Mike Nager on. Mike is the manager for the Solutions Center at Festo Didactic. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it.
Very excited to have you on here. So, Mike, give us some background. What uh, originally pulled you into this space? And, what are you currently doing at this point, both with Festo and then your outside interest in moving the industry forward as well?
Yeah, so let me describe the company a little bit first. Many of your listeners and viewers probably are familiar with Festo as a pneumatic and hydraulic controls company, having been in business for 100 years and providing all sorts of cylinders and manifolds and sensors and gantry systems that are used by machine builders all over the world. I'd imagine your viewers are familiar with Festo Automation Company. A little less popular or less well known is a division of Festo called Festo Didactic. And Festo Didactic is 60 years old this year. And our core mission is to help educators throughout the world, in my role throughout the United States, develop the hands-on learning platforms needed for manufacturing and using things like industrial controls and robots and conveyors and software systems. Doing the German model in a way of a very hands-on apprentice-like experience for students. So my role is to interface with colleges and universities to help them with that hands-on component for manufacturing disciplines. My own personal career, I've spent 25 years in companies similar to Festo Automation, selling all sorts of cool widgets and gadgets that did things better than the previous generations. And I was helping U.S. manufacturers compete on the world stage by providing automation systems and taking labor out of different processes. And when the opportunity came up 10 years ago to kind of shift my gears and help U.S. manufacturers, not on the technical side, but on the workforce development side, I kind of jumped at it because it sounded like a really great opportunity to do something similar, but different in the same ways. So for the last 10 years, that's been my focus, concentrating on the training and education for workforce development, skills development, things of that nature.
And what do you do in your spare time for fun, Mike?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I live at the Jersey Shore. So the beach is not too far away, and New York City and Philadelphia aren't too far away either. Do fun activities at those three locations. Another part of what I do related to the workforce development side is not only the skills development where workers and students need to develop the skills, but there's a pipeline problem in manufacturing in general. And there's not enough young people that are considering going into the field. So I wrote a couple of books aimed at high school students and middle school students and their teachers and their counselors and their parents to kind of introduce them to the world of manufacturing, because for great percent of young people, they don't have any firsthand experience with it. They don't even have secondhand experience. They don't know anybody that's working in the manufacturing industry that tells them when they go to the office, they're working with, a fleet of mobile robots and all sorts of cool technology. So I'm trying to address what I call the awareness gap that is also hurting our workforce pipeline in this country, specifically for manufacturing. So that's what I kind of do in my spare time. It
sounds like it keeps you busy, Mike.
keeps me busy. The idea came, during the lockdown and COVID, when all the travel, I travel pretty frequently to these colleges and universities across the country and some in Canada. And when the lockdown came, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to stay out of my family's way and not annoy them too much? So
That's an excellent way to put it, Mike. Not enjoyed it.
It really is.
So I was like, I wrote this series of LinkedIn articles. How hard would it be to put them all together and put them into a book? And then like 6 months later, I pulled out the rest of my hair, and it was harder than I expected.
Well, hey, look, sticking with this manufacturing theme and your experience in the industry, I know you must have seen a a really good cross section of manufacturing, and I'm wondering if you could tell us what's changed the most over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that 25-year career that I had working for various automation manufacturing companies, I was in customer facing positions. So sales and marketing and applications. And as such, I was able to visit, I tallied it up and I come up with the number of 500 manufacturing plants in my career. I've been inside, pharmaceuticals, tires, automotive, robots, conveyors, the whole gamut, and utilities as well. And what's common across all of that is the need to um, collect, store, utilize, and make sense of data. So no matter what industry you're in, being able to collect and understand data seems to be the biggest thing that's changing. And now with the explosion in AI over the last 2 years, exploding into the public consciousness, that need for data is even more apparent as the AI needs something to work with, right? So, prior to maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when I was talking to educators about their technical programs, we were talking very much about physical hardware, how to adjust a sensor, how do you determine if a flow meter calibration is out of whack, things like that. I've noticed a big change now in those same educational programs trying to meet industry needs by introducing the software stack. What do we have at the IO level for networks? How does that low level data and information get communicated up to a manufacturing execution system platform so that real-time changes can be made that affect productivity, efficiency, quality, not at the end of the shift or at the end of the run, right? So even at the technician and operator level, we're saying those folks need to know what a human machine interface screen is that's on the side of the machine and be able to understand what it's telling them prior to that red light going off and production stopping. So I would say data is probably the biggest change that I've seen across the board.
Yeah, we hear that quite a bit. The part that you touched on there too is the data acquisition is all the hype right now. But I think where companies, what we hear anyway, where companies are struggling most is making sense of the data and understanding what to do with all of the data. There's such an immense amount that they're getting. I think it really is just interpreting the data at this point and then figuring out a method to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a huge issue because, a lot of that data was siloed, different pieces of equipment or instruments or if you're lucky, maybe one manufacturing line had its data. It wasn't named and organized in a way that's super, super convenient. So you have, tags and things that change and don't mean the same thing from one unit to the next. So when you try to say, oh, I've got a terabyte of data that all my sensors and machines have collected, we'll just, send it to Claude AI and and it'll make sense of it. Well, Claude's looking at it befuddled as well because things are not organized properly. In the automation world, there's a huge push now to kind of standardize that whole data realm more and more. And there's a lot of organizations and individuals that are making a living just doing that.
Right. So as you've been to a multitude of plants in your career, when you first walk into a plant, what catches your attention first?
Yeah, well, you can tell pretty quickly how orderly a plant is, So, there's a lot of principles that aren't new by any means. Lean manufacturing, 5S, concepts. So if you walk in and things look visually organized, usually that's a pretty good indication of the whole organization in general, right? So, I'm sure you've walked into different companies and plants and, in the front lawn, everything's overgrown and nothing's clipped and there's no receptionist. And you walk back and there's, kind of litter and trash everywhere and papers. And you're like, oh, you instantly don't get a good feeling about that. So I would say that would be the first impression. And then, you can also pick up on how people are communicating and working together, pretty quickly. When you go into a plant, Are people approachable? Are they curious? Do they look scared if you're walking around with the CEO, of the plant and they try to make themselves scarce? Or do they come up and offer some tidbit of information or ask if they can help? That's a huge indicator too, right? Just reading.
It is.
So, just sticking with that theme just a minute here, what do you think separates operations that really are truly effective from those that basically just look like they're effective or all hat, no cattle type situation? Is there any particular thing you could point out?
Well, I think how quickly the operations can change based on new information, right? So, I think there's some of these lean principles or something where, at every place there'd be, a string that you could pull down and stop the production line because you've noticed something has gone wrong. Do people actually feel empowered to pull that string? Or is there a culture within the company? And like, I'm not going to be the one that stops this line for 30 minutes because I think a sensor might be misaligned and that yellow, maybe that yellow light's not going to turn red on my shift. So I'll let it go through.
Ride it out.
Right. And we still have companies where people, they're compensated or based, almost on a per unit piece. Did this line produce the 500 widgets it was supposed to produce in the time period? And if it didn't, then, you personally get dinged, for that. So are you going to pull that cord? Right. So that's a little bit harder to suss out, just on a quick meeting, but you could ask for statistics, like how many times has that happened? How many times has an employee idea been implemented? How many ideas, are coming in on a yearly basis? If they're all low numbers, then that gives you an indication, the static of that place. The next shift that happens, which we know will be coming sooner or later, they're going to be caught flat-footed. The time to prepare is now, and the best companies are pushing decision-making down to the lowest level possible. That's been a trend for quite some time. It's even more important today.
It is. But I think it's a difficult shift for leadership to make in certain organizations as well. I think that takes time. That's probably going to take the longest time, Mike, to get alignment there between the floor level decisions versus leadership decisions and that kind of meet in the middle to go forward, because you have to have the input from the floor to make things.
Yeah, definitely. And you have to have that empowerment culture within the organization. I just read an article this morning. I have to go back and see if I can find it. I think it was on LinkedIn, and someone made the statement and the hypothesis that in most organizations at every level, if you have line managers and executive managers and C-suites, this person's idea is everyone is operating and their day-to-day business is one level lower than what their title indicates. And I thought that was kind of interesting way. And the person saying, there's a lot of missed opportunity because the people that are working on, a day-to-day project who are supposed to be the visionaries looking out what's going to happen in 6 months or next year aren't doing that because they're caught. And that ripples all the way down. So the technician's operating as an operator and the engineer is operating as a technician. I thought it was kind of interesting. I'm not 100% convinced, it's true, but I think there's probably a kernel of truth to it.
Let's talk Industry 4.0. Why do you think those efforts fail?
Well, I think we're in the middle of it. So there's a lot of talk about pilot programs that don't result in anything other than being a pilot program. There's a lot of criticism, and rightfully so, about, where's the results of this industry? Is it really happening? I think up until the AI became as prevalent as it is now, it was more of a evolution than a revolution, right? Because the whole nomenclature of Industry 4.0 is that, it's the fourth industrial revolution. The hallmarks of an industrial revolution, the industrial revolution that we all read about in high school, is that, technology upheaved society in a huge way. So people left farms and cities became bigger, work changed. And up until this point, have we really seen that societal change? It was more incremental. And so with the AI now, though, and AI was always part of Industry 4.0. We don't need Industry 5.0 or Industry 6.0 to make room for AI. It was part of Industry 4.0 right from the very beginning. I think we're seeing the glimpse of how something that revolutionary could come to be in the next 5 years or 10 years. Or another reason is that early efforts of Industry 4.0 were led by technology-oriented people. So you would have engineers and technicians and maybe engineering management being like, taking a little piece of Industry 4.0. Maybe we can make this system a wireless system instead of a wired one, and we'll do this science experiment from a grassroots project, and we'll prove an ROI to our upper management, where in reality, it should be the upper management, the owners, and the C-suite folks that are saying, we have a whole new direction. We're going to have a whole new way of doing manufacturing. We're not going to mass produce stuff anymore. We're going to individually produce made to order product right to the customer specification. And this is everything that we're doing has to change. And for the most part, that did not happen or not happen yet. Right. But you're starting to see, pieces of it. I was in the market for a new suit because I'm going to a wedding in the summertime. I need a black suit to fit in with everyone. And when I went to the mall, there's 2 companies now that do like semi-personalized suit creation for you. So you go in, they measure you, and they'll send it off to a factory to produce your clothing. So you're starting to see that personalization come in.
Hey, Mike, I've got a question about investing in automation and what companies do wrong. What specifically do you think companies do wrong when they're investing in automation, and how does that failure manifest itself inside a facility?
Yeah, so we're living in a great area where so many cool devices and instruments and robots are being invented. So sometimes there's a push to implement a new technology before the business case is worked out totally, right? So one good example a few years ago was robotics. So you would see these great pieces of equipment that are very flexible and can do things, and we need to bring it in, because it would look really good for the company if we could say that we're using it. But the analysis on the front end of connecting that to a business problem or a business need or something was a little bit, lacking. I think we're seeing the same thing right now with AI. People are very keen to show that their shareholders that they're going to be on the forefront of the AI revolution. They're going to bring in, different programs, but what is it that you're actually using it for and solving? So I think that front end analysis probably has always been the thing that, some folks and some organizations will jump to be on the bandwagon, but not, fully implement, because these technologies have the ability to be transformational, right? Just not replacing, a human person with a piece of technology, either physically or kind of mentally, right? When you talk about robots and AI, it has the ability to transform the whole organization. My favorite analogy, which I did not come up with, but I've heard several times, is like when automobiles were first developed. The first automobiles for at least 10 years kind of looked like the old carriages that they replaced, right? Because they're like, oh, we're going to take the horse out of the front of this thing, and we're going to put this engine in the front of the thing. Everything else is going to kind of stay the same. And I think that's where we are right now with, in a way, with both robotics and AI. We are now saying, okay, we're taking out this human labor or this human thought, and we're replacing it with this machine labor or this machine thought, but not really thinking about how that really could transform everything. So I would say most AI now is being used as a fancy spell checker, helps you write paragraphs, right?
You're probably right there.
But we've already got spell checkers.
You already have a spell checker, but at least now, you don't have to misspell it. It'll just write it for you. So I think that's where we're at. And it's very hard to see beyond that. It's the visionaries that really can see how can we use this in a whole new way. The entrepreneurs that see, an ability to make something not just 10% better, but, 10 times better. That's the power of these tools. You could think of like an AI, it's going to help me figure out which stocks I should buy, and then I'll do analysis, then I'll go online. A transformational big thing would be, having it as an agent that's monitoring it in real time and making decisions without you even thinking about it in your sleep. Because I noticed that the Asian stock market, is doing something while you're sleeping, and you wake up to, a nice fat bank account, right? That's transformational.
Yeah. You're giving Alan ideas now. Like, I can see his mind going, Let's talk about the human resource portion of all of this, Mike. So, at what point in the process should the talent strategy enter the conversation? And piggyback on that, companies invest millions and then hesitate on the people. Where do you think that disconnect comes in?
Yeah. So, the short answer is that the people in the workforce should be being thought about every single day, because for the last at least 10 years, if you go to any conference and people, will put up on a slide what are the surveys that were done of CEOs of what the most pressing problem is, some issue with workforce is always in the top three. It's not the first one. It's at least in the top three. And there's different ways that it's mentioned, but it's always related to workforce. If you're in manufacturing and you're not panicking about the workforce issue, then something is wrong, because panic is certainly apropos. And the reason I say that is, in addition to everything else that's going on, we have a demographic curve that should be frightening everybody. And you can get a sneak leading indicator of it by looking at enrollment at the 4-year universities and colleges throughout this country. And they are in steep decline right now. So we have one college and university merger or going out of business every week in this country, right? Why? Well, the demographic curve means there's not as many young people as the previous generations coming through. You're going to start to feel that 4 years from now when you're looking for college graduates to come work for your firm. So it should be foremost and forefront, because no one's going to come to the rescue for your company other than yourself. There's no white knight, coming in and being like, okay, next year when you need to hire, 10 people with these very specific skill sets, they're going to be available for you at the cost of what you want to pay their salary and wages.
That's the key, Mike, right? I mean, there might be 1,000 people available, but if you're not willing to pay them for the skills that you're looking for, then that's a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that have to happen concurrently and simultaneously. So I'm focusing on one portion, small portion of it. One cog in this huge machine that has to get up and running. But, I sit on a lot of councils, where educators and manufacturers are together. And a lot of times, the manufacturers kind of point their finger at the educators, like, you're not producing the materials that I need and students with the skills. But then you ask them, well, do you have an internship program? Do you have an apprentice program? Do you participate in Manufacturing Week and bring students in? Do you sit on the advisory board of the educational institution?
That's what I was just going to ask. How much the finger pointers there, Mike, how much input are they giving the educators to direct them?
Yeah. So, the best thing is, what can we do for ourselves? How can we do it? And I've talked to hundreds of educators, administrators, and folks in the educational institutions across this country over the last 10 years. They all want to do a good job. They all want to satisfy the industry's needs. And what they're lacking is input or good input. So, okay, some companies do have advisors that sit on the board, but who are they sending? They're sending out, maintenance manager or the maintenance tech, to sit on the board and tell them, which tools they use, at the plant. And that's fine and that's good. But how about if the CEO or the vice president came and sat there and be like, in the next 5 years, we see this data explosion. So in addition to, knowing if you should put Teflon tape on a pipe joint, how do you extract information out of an MES software system in order to do some sort of predictive maintenance? That would also be something that we're very interested in doing. And for the most part, we don't have nearly that level. There's a few good examples around, but for the most part, that's what's missing.
Mike, in answer to an earlier question, I think you said you'd been into about 500 different manufacturing facilities. So you've seen hundreds of teams working with automation. So what do you think, what factor do you think actually makes a team successful in an automation environment? Is there one or two things you could point to particularly that?
I think the biggest thing, and it gets into the psychology, if you remember, like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, in human psychology, the first thing that people need to do is to feel safe. Because if you don't have the safety that um, I'm working for an organization that values me, new technology comes along, it's an opportunity for me to grow as an individual, as a professional. It's not something that's going to replace me. That's probably the first thing that kind of stands out in my mind. Is that company culture one where people feel included? They feel like they have a say. There's an atmosphere there where there's safety in exploring new things, even making some mistakes, but that you're going to be part of it in the long run. And I think that's missing in too many places. We're going to hire, we're going to employ robots and reduce our labor costs. Well, that's the exact wrong message. When the 14-year-old is trying to decide, should I get into this manufacturing industry or,
Right. Yeah.
maybe medicine or law or finance looks a little bit better. Right. So what people think that the stakeholders want to hear might be the exact opposite of what the workforce, the other
Right.
shareholders hold. Right.
What would you change if you could reset how to develop talent today? If anything, maybe you wouldn't.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty universally accepted at this point that we have to reach people earlier and we have to show them the why of what they're doing much earlier. So, back in the old ages when I went to engineering school, the freshman year, it was all the basic courses and you had to have your calculus and your differential equations and your statics and your dynamics. And, if you stuck with it, for the 4 years, which was torture, you finally got to work on a senior project, right? And now, hey, I'm going to apply and actually do something engineering related. And hopefully at that point, you didn't hate it. Wouldn't be like, I wish I studied something different. So I think there's a big emphasis, especially at the university level. I see freshmen working on engineering projects now. Some of the schools have developed like really cool programs. We develop mobile robots to detect landmines in places like Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, have these landmines that have been in the earth for 50 years and are still killing people every day, right? And they get the students, 18-year-olds, working on this stuff that saves lives, right? And it brings meaning and the why back to it, not just the how. So the more that we can expose people to stuff like that, not just in college, high school, middle school, that'll do wonders for workforce development or workforce pipeline, I should say.
If someone is a company is looking to invest in automation right now, in preparation of doing that, what do you think they should do first, Mike?
Well, I think they should look at the business case, and be like, okay, where's our pain point truly? And that's hard to see when you're inside of it, right? So sometimes you need to bring some sort of consultant in or someone that can, illuminate what that pain point is. And it turns out maybe it's not technology, maybe getting pieces onto a conveyor belt faster isn't the solution, right? Maybe there's some other constraint within the line that if it was fixed, it would achieve it. So I would say, like what we talked about before, don't try to throw the technology at a system without knowing what it's supposed to change, and try to think about that big picture portion of it.
I think that's the trap that folks get caught into. You alluded to it earlier. We'll try this one thing, right? And we'll do this one thing. And a lot of times I think it is siloed within an organization depending on what you're responsible for, right? So we'll try this and then we'll try this. Then at the end of the day, potentially, what you've improved isn't talking to each other or working together, and it's not really improving performance anywhere. So then it appears that, there's no return in making these these investments in this. It's not as much a holistic view as it is a singular view, depending on where you sit in the company sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. A lot of the folks that I interface with are in the industrial engineering departments. Okay, because those are the folks that have like the systems of systems mindset. So, if you look at the other engineering disciplines, you got it, electrical and mechanical, they tend to be focused in smaller than what the industrial engineering departments are doing. So I think they're well positioned. They're coming up, with how can we use the data from the processing line and the packaging line and figure out where that constraint is in order to remove it. So a lot of my work with Festo Didactic is with the industrial engineering departments around the country.
Do you think that industry is underestimating or overestimating what's coming down the pike with regards to automation, AI, things of that nature?
I think you can't go wrong by saying it's going to be underestimated. Okay. Because what's lurking out there and what's torture is that business models are going to change and they'll probably change fast. And, in our private life, we've all seen the rise of Amazon. Well, that was a game changer, right? So there's a famous interview on TV back when Amazon was getting started, and the interviewer asked Jeff Bezos, "Oh, so you're going to be like the Walmart of the internet?" And Jeff Bezos said, "No, that's too limiting. We're not going to be like the Walmart. We're going to be something completely new that's hard for people to imagine. We're going to deliver anything that you might want in your life in hours," right?
And they do.
And now they do. 20 years later, they do. They started off with books, because there was a long tail problem with books, and bookstores, can only have a certain amount of inventory, but now the services and all that sort of stuff. So that's the hard thing. So the business models at some point will change to more customized, more personalized, less mass production type of stuff, except for the true commodities, right? So, and that requires, a front end to the customer base that maybe you didn't have before. It requires you to become an IT internet company, with an app so that you can order your clothing or your device or your car, personalized. So I like to say, with Industry 3.5 is kind of the Amazon model where, you can go on and you can order something from your laptop, your cell phone. And the second you push that button, there's some sort of material handling equipment that starts buzzing in a warehouse somewhere, and they're going to go pick that stuff off the shelf, and you're going to get it in 2 hours or 3 hours or one day, depending on where you live, right? In an Industry 4.0 world, you would have a similar app. You hit it, but it's not going to a distributor like Amazon. It's going to the manufacturer. And instead of that material handling equipment whirling and trying to go pick off the shelf, the production equipment is going to start up and start producing that 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of whatever you've just decided that you wanted and start manufacturing it from scratch. So, think about something like sneakers or ties or clothing. It's a huge advantage because the mass production model produces so much waste in the entire supply chain that's not counted for and not calculated. That's all going to disappear, right? You're not going to have stuff that you have to discard, sell at a discount, burn, incinerate, throw into a landfill because no one bought it. It's made to order. And when those changes happen, that's going to catch a lot of companies off guard. Most companies won't be able to do the shift. We know that's from history. There's no buggy companies that transition to creating automobiles.
And no slide rule companies that made handheld computers either that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's another great example. So I heard a lecture once. The guy, he gave the example of ice, the ice that you put into drinks to make them cold. Starting in 1800, there was an ice trade where people would go up to the polar regions and carve out big blocks of ice and put them onto ships and bring them to warmer climates. Rich people would buy the ice and use it for whatever they wanted. They would have to make these insulated ships. They would do that. And then refrigeration came. Well, none of the companies that made the insulated ships and went to the Arctic to make ice became refrigerator companies. It was a completely new paradigm, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of examples, of that sort of. But that's the nature of business, right? It's hard to shift. That's the nature of it. That people should try.
Yeah, I think it was the CEO of Toyota years ago said, if you're not willing to, preempt your own self and bring new things to the market, somebody else will do it for you.
Yeah. Yep. And we're seeing a lot of examples with that, with the automotive industry. A lot of the software that goes into an automobile was outsourced, to third-party companies. Now that's causing a lot of problems as everything is becoming data-driven, right? So you have startups in China and Tesla, that can reimagine the automobile as a platform, as opposed to a hunk of metal with some software widgets inside of it. So it's super hard, but that's what we should be, informing our young people. This is the mentality that you have to have. That entrepreneurial spirit is more important than ever.
It does. Curiosity, 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Mike, do you have a copy of your book or books?
Yeah, I always
that
have
you
a
can
copy
look
nearby.
through? Let's talk about that for a minute, please.
Can we get that on Amazon?
Yeah. It's on Amazon. And
everybody watching, you can get it in 2 hours, depending on where you live. Don't wait.
Yeah, you can get it in 1 minute if you get the Kindle version.
Yeah.
But that's what I call an enabling technologies. If there was no Amazon, there would be no book, be no, Mike Nager as an engineer working in automation, thinking that, he had the gall and the ability to create a book for sale, right? But the Amazon model is an industry 4.0 model. It's print on demand. Like, people are like 20 years ago, they'd be like, okay, you can write a book, but the minimum order is 2,000 copies and you have to order this and you have to stick it under your dining room table and hide it from the rest of your family. And it's your problem. But now, this book is print on demand. If you order this paperback or this hardcover book and press the button, there's a printing press somewhere in the United States that's going to print this for you and send it out to you in about 2 days. So that's the model. So the Smart Student's Guide to Smart Manufacturing was aimed at high school students. And this was to give them a little bit of a window into the world of manufacturing if they didn't have personal experience or anyone in their life that could describe it. The analogy I like to use is with our friends in the construction industry. If you walk down a street, there's a skyscraper being built in the city. They have those plywood walls to protect rocks from hitting people, but they're really nice. They always put a little window inside of it so you can look in. And I always wonder, like, how many future employees in the construction industry were 5 or 6 years old or 10 years old and looked through that and so, a bulldozer and a crane. I want to do that. So I try to make a kind of a virtual window into the manufacturing environment, because a lot of manufacturing is done in windowless, fabricated steel buildings off the side of the highway. I try to take my Sawzall and make like a little window in the wall, but the facility guys don't like it when I try to do that. So I was like, how can I make a virtual window into that world? And I said, I'll write this book.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So I'm very proud it was picked up by Siemens and by Deloitte, and they were able to purchase mass quantities of them and
awesome.
send them to teachers throughout the country. And then I was like, well, we also have to hit the middle school kids, because high school, it's already too late. People are already self-selecting it. So the second one was all about smart manufacturing, which is a picture book for elementary or middle school kids, kind of trying to show, young people there in the manufacturing world and try to kind of make it rhyme as best as a electrical engineer can be a poet.
That's great. And you left them all over Europe, didn't you?
Yes, at little free libraries all over the place. So
that's awesome.
So that's my way of trying to address the awareness gap. So trying to make people aware.
Mm-hmm.
So at least it crosses their mind, the manufacturing industries, before they make a finance choice. Would I like to make stuff?
That's great.
It is. That's awesome.
Both available on Amazon.
Very good. Well, Mike, thank you so much. So pleased that you were willing to come on and talk to us. Truly our pleasure here to get your insights on this. There's so many moving parts right now with
Yeah.
everything that's going on.
Amen. Yeah.
No, I
So,
appreciate you using your vehicle to get the word out. This workforce pipeline and skills development issue is not going to go away by itself. And certainly, if anyone in your audience wants to talk about it further, I'm available. I'm on LinkedIn. Ping me there. Be happy to discuss anything that I know and help as much as possible.
absolutely. Well, thank you again, Mike. Really appreciate
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. Thanks, Alan.